Speaking of sad, we're coming to our Muppet of the Month, and
This isn't sad. This is a very stable genius.
a very stable genius. But this Muppet of the Month is specifically, we are naming this as a Muppet, act of Muppetry, because of the threat to target sites of cultural significance in Iran, made by President Donald Trump on the 4th of January. Um, is a truly astonishing act of international muppetry, if not actually an admission of an intent to commit war crimes.
Yeah,
Just, it's
what do
amazing.
we say? You've just encompassed the whole thing. Um, it's it is you, just when you thought it couldn't get any more bizarre,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
the Trump presidency could not get go any further in winding up the international community,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
certain parts of the international community.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, for anyone who isn't 100% familiar, and we lived with this for a few days at the beginning of the month, where when the hashtag World War III is trending, you start to get worried.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, this was the Trump regime's, sorry, that makes it sound like some third world dictatorship. The Trump administration's decision to first of all target General Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's overseas operations,
Hmm. Hmm.
um, on his way to the airport in Baghdad. So it was uh, an assassination carried out on the grounds of on the territory of a third country.
Hmm. Hmm.
The international and the international law around that was has been questioned
Hmm.
by a number of people, whether it was actually a legal act in the first place. Particularly given that there was, although there were allegations, there were no evidence offered that Soleimani was involved in any kind of imminent threat to the United States or United States nationals.
Hmm. And people have been, well, were hopping and jumping around to try and justify this in various ways.
Yes.
But what really got the attention of many of our colleagues and as well was the tweet targeted 52 Iranian sites
Some at a very high level and important to Iran and Iranian
in
culture.
culture, and
And
those
those targets
targets
and Iran itself will be hit very, in capitals, will be
hit
hit very
very.
fast and very hard.
That literally feels like someone is physically demonstrating to him how a missile works. So Mr.
Yeah.
Trump, yeah, very fast and very hard. Have you seen our missiles? They're so fast. They're so hard. Um,
Um, and then uh, having tweeted this, he then followed up, doubled down on Air Force One, talking to journalists the
yeah.
following day, and said, uh, "quote They're allowed to kill our people. Quote
Are they?
They're allowed to talk to maim our people. They're allowed to use roadside bombs and blow up our people, and we're not allowed to touch their cultural sites. It doesn't work that way.
It really doesn't work that
Unfortunately,
way. So go on.
no, but as I say, unfortunately, it does work that way because there are international agreements, not least the Geneva Hague Conventions, that make it illegal under international law to deliberately target cultural sites.
But also,
And
sorry,
that's
sorry. I say it doesn't work that way in so much as no, they're not allowed to plant IEDs. That
yeah,
just happens. It's the US as a well again as we've stated previously this month as a bastion of self-proclaimed bastion of freedom and of upholding international standards. In this instance, they are. Uh, it does work that way, as you say. Along those lines, yes, they are beholden to simple Geneva standards on protocols with regards to cultural
well,
sites.
not just that. I mean, the supreme irony of it was pointed out that in 2017, the UN Security Council, on which the US sits and has a veto,
Mm,
passed a resolution condemning the destruction of heritage sites in the context of so-called Islamic State in Syria.
mm.
So and that was under the Trump administration.
Yeah, yeah. So
So
when
you know,
terrorists do it, that's wrong. But when I want to just threaten cultural sites, then
yeah,
why aren't I allowed to do that?
and absolutely,
Very strange.
and the, the absurdity of what Trump had suggested and the illegality of what Trump had suggested. You could immediately see from the reaction of various people commenting on this at the
And
government
the
level,
Pentagon.
with the Pentagon and the Department of Defense
Yeah,
and in politicians in the UK and so on. They could immediately see themselves standing in the dock at The Hague,
yeah, yeah.
you know,
Hmm.
because it is illegal under the Geneva and Hague Conventions.
Hmm.
If they they would not be allowed to deliberately target cultural sites. And the Defence Secretary said quite possibly. Well, so pithily, so it couldn't be possibly clear. We will follow the laws of armed conflict, he said. And yeah, given how difficult it is for anyone in the American administration to criticize the president and keep their job, that was
Yeah,
probably about as far as he could go.
yeah, yeah.
But
Well,
and also generals were saying various generals were saying the same thing.
mm.
Um,
Well, it's
and of
worthwhile.
course,
Sorry, it's worthwhile so go ahead, go ahead. Sorry.
no, I was going to say, and it also immediately played into the hands of the Iranians because it put the Americans on the defensive.
Yeah.
And because they immediately started tweeting lists of World Heritage sites in Iran and
Mm,
saying how illegal it would be to target them and things like
mm,
that.
mm,
Now there was another very interesting angle on this which cropped up in archaeological social media,
mm,
which was why are you getting exercised about the destruction of cultural sites when actually what the first line, the first campaign here should be to prevent the destruction of people, the killing of people.
mm, mm,
That people, we can lose Persepolis, but people's lives are more important
mm,
in the end.
mm,
And you can have some sympathy with that.
mm,
That again, populations, particularly civilian populations who would suffer collaterally. And again, we saw in the end that one of the reasons the situation de-escalated was the appalling accidental shooting down of the Ukrainian airliner,
yeah, yeah,
with the loss of hundreds, over 150 civilian lives.
yeah.
This is not a game, actually.
No.
But crass and irresponsible statements and tweets like that do not help.
Well, they don't help, and they're not made. Well, I would argue they're not made by sane people, but they're also not made by grown-ups.
No.
Um, it's probably worthwhile as well. And I know I interrupted you when you were going to go to quote this and point this out, but there's a quote here quite helpfully. The laws of war prohibit deliberate attacks on civilian objects not being used for military purposes. Objects of great importance to a people's cultural heritage must not be the object of attack. Article 53 of Protocol 1 or Protocol I to the Geneva Conventions specifically prohibits any act of hostility against cultural objects, including making such objects the target of reprisals. The US Law of War Manual 2016, which has
Mhm.
extensive provisions relating to the protection of cultural property, incorporates this provision into US law. So you'd be breaking
Yeah.
US law and international law. The US is also a party to the Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the event of armed conflict,
As
1954.
is now the UK.
Yeah, well, thank goodness, which similarly
Yep.
prohibits such attacks. So,
Yep.
Muppet. Muppet, 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 and actually,
Yeah.
what a Muppet to start the decade on as well.
Well, if the
You know,
polling's to be believed, there's a strong chance we'll be dealing with him for the next 4 years as
yeah.
well.
So
And in
he's
fact, if some of the American comedians who say that he's never going to, he won't voluntarily leave office, it could be a lot longer.
yeah. So he's got time to raise that bar, hasn't he?
Alternatively, the burgers and the KFC could get him. So who knows?
That's true. Yeah.